Shalom Aleichem. Welcome to Breslov Web Seminar, Parshas Vayeishev. Vayeishev is one of the most heart-rending, beautiful parshas that you can think of. They're all beautiful, but heart-rending in the sense that here we have a story of brotherly love, said in a sarcastic manner. Yaakov dwelled in the land of Canaan. That's how the parsha starts off, Genesis 37. And he had his children, and Yosef, who was his youngest by a few years until Binyamin was born, but Yosef was his favorite, and it clearly says that, Ki ben zekunim hulo, he was a child of his elder years, but he was his favorite. And the Gemara says everything that Yaakov received from learning all his years before in Shem Vayeishev and other places, he gave over to Yosef more than the other brothers. Well, they were all older than him. That's a perfect recipe for jealousy. And they were jealous of him. And the Parsha tells us how eventually Yosef would have dreams that he would be their ruler, and they made mockery of him, and they didn't want him. And eventually the brothers went away, and they sold Yosef into slavery. You sold your brother into slavery. You imagine that? All right, the Parsha continues that after Yosef disappears and Yaakov is grief-stricken, so Yehuda has a whole story where he went into business with some guy, Chira Ha'adulami, and he had a few sons, and the sons were wicked. They wasted seed, if you go back to our Parshas Noach. And two of them, Yehuda took a bride for them, a daughter-in-law, Tamar, and she became a levirate marriage to Shelah, the youngest. But it didn't happen that way. She was supposed to wait, but Yehuda instead ended up with her. He stayed with her, and he had a few more children. And he had Peretz and Zorach. Then the Parsha continues. Yosef was sold into slavery into the house of Potiphar, who was one of the big masters in, he was the Sarah Tabachim, the chief food supplier of Paro, and how Potiphar's wife chased after Yosef, and she had him imprisoned afterwards, and how he interpreted the dreams for the master of the Sarah Mashkim and Sarah Ophim, the baker, the chief wine taster, the chief baker, and so on. That's the Parsha. And it's really heartrending that the tribes, these are the 12 tribes that are supposed to bring forth the Jewish nation, and they have this jealousy and intersinner warfare between them to the point where they sold Yosef into slavery. All right? Rebbe Nachman explains that Yosef was the true tzaddik among the brothers. They were all great tzaddikim, very great tzaddikim. But Yosef was the truest of the tzaddikim. He was closest to Yaakov in everything than all the other brothers. And he had that connection to Yaakov that was far greater than the other brothers. The other brothers couldn't understand how or why that this would really take place. And therefore, like today, they ended up with machlokas, strife within the community. Oh, this one is no good, this one is good, this one can't be good. It's the classic machloket, the classic strife that is found in the Jewish nation from then on, right? Korach later on rose up against Moshe. Shaul had the fight with King David. And you have throughout the Tanakh and throughout Chazal, the Gemaras and Midrashim, it's the classic arguments of the Tzaddikim, but not quite on the greatest level of the greatest tzaddik, which is why we always find these great machloikas, these great strifes against the tzaddikim. All right, let's give you an example. The Arizal. The Arizal lived about 450 years ago, and closer to 500 maybe. And he revealed the Kabbalah. At that time, Kabbalah was not much spoken about. The Zohar had just been found maybe 100 years earlier, not even. And the Kabbalah was coming to the fore, but it wasn't so much in the foreground. And who rose up against the Arizal? The Marshal, Reb Shlomo Luria, who was considered one of the greatest Gaonim of that period. And the Marshal wanted to put the Arizal in Cherem, to excommunicate him. The Arizal saw this. The Marshal was such a great tzaddik. The Arizal took steps to prevent it. The story is in the Shivchei Ari. But whatever happened, he stopped the machlokas. But then a few hundred years later came the Baal Shem Tov. And people argued against the Baal Shem Tov because they couldn't accept that this person is the true tzaddik, the leader of the generation. And they had all this futile machlokas that rose up and prevented the people from following the Baal Shem Tov. Same thing happened with Rebbe Nachman. And there's still today a lot of people who argue against Rebbe Nachman and whatnot. So what we have is this Parsha is teaching us, be very careful. You could maybe find very great tzaddikim who could lead you on a path and show you that this is what the Torah wants of you. And there could be one tzaddik in there who's greater than all of them, and you may not find him. You don't know. Okay, if you don't know, then stay out of the machlokas. Why do you have to get involved with the strife? You don't know, you're not this kind of tzaddik, you're not that kind of tzaddik. You anyway don't rate. So then why get involved in the machlokas? That's the major lesson of this week's Parsha. Right? Never to despair, because Hashem will always send us salvation. And that's the whole story of Yehuda and Tamar, which the Gemara and the Medrash tell us. This is how Moshiach eventually came out to the world. Right? From Yehuda and Tamar came out Peretz, who was the forebearer of David HaMelech, Moshiach. So, no matter what happens, even if you commit the worst mistake, Moshiach is going to be there to rectify it and to bring us all back to Hashem. And we just have to do the right thing. But how do we get to do the right thing? If we follow and we look for and we search for the great tzaddik. Yosef was the tzaddik. Yosef was that person. Yosef was able to withstand the test by Potiphar's wife. She ran after him for a year's time. He was in the house. He was subordinate to her. He was a servant. And yet, he strengthened himself to refuse her advances, and he came out as a tzaddik. Eventually, there's a Seder Adoris, he brings the story that after she took his cloak from him, right, she called the people, she screamed and she yelled, and there was a young child in the house at the time, an infant who couldn't talk, right? When she began telling over her story of what happened, a miracle happened, and the child started speaking. And the child said that this woman had made advances against Yosef for a year's time, and he never listened to her. She's lying. All right? That's what the kid said, but it was Potiphar who was Paro's chief butcher and in charge of the food, so he had to imprison him. He imprisoned him. He ended up in prison 12 years. But Yosef was in prison, and he told the future of Klal Yisrael when the chief wine steward had a dream. Yosef said, "You gave me a good thought, so you'll be able to live." The Sarah Ophim told about different things that were bad for the Jews, so Yosef said, "You're going to end up being killed," which is what happened. But that's Yosef, that's the tzaddik. We have to learn to search for the tzaddik, to look for the tzaddik, hope that we find the tzaddik, and Be'ez Hashem, if we do, we'll be able to find the salvation like Yehuda and Tamar. It's waiting around in the wings for us, and may Hashem help that we merit to the coming of Moshiach. B'mheira b'yameinu, amen.